DEI is over. And according to some on the left, I guess this is apparently a good thing.
DEI, as it's currently constituted, to me, and this is what I said on Twitter that got people really angry, is that it is an active impediment to building a multiracial working class.
But in supporting the end of DEI policies, leftist critics might be running the risk of playing into far-right logic. Now, there are valid critiques of the excesses of DEI policy.
I need y'all to understand that DEI was always trash. Like, the main people that are going to get hurt from DEI programs are white women, and I don't wish bad upon those white women. But understand, the real purpose of DEI was never being met anyway.
But is hyper-focusing on these examples taking the left down a dangerous political path? One that might actively undermine the ability to organize against the anti-worker policies of the Trump administration. Well, one reason that some on the left are celebrating the death of DEI is due to how vague the term has become. While many see DEI as a form of prejudice or as a system of unfair advantage, those on the left view it as shallow diversity policies that cover up more serious injustices. You know, it's like when your workplace will recognize your pronouns, but you haven't gotten a raise in 4 years and they ask you to work on the weekend. That sort of stuff. And it's not hard to find examples of the liberal version of this that's led to skepticism from the left. Hell, even weapons companies love DEI. So I don't know about you, if I was a child overseas, I would feel much better about having my life ripped from me by the American military, or a military that the American government funds, if I knew that the rocket was woke. And while it's easy to laugh some of this off, these trends do warrant serious critique, especially as there is a history of state and corporate powers co-opting potentially subversive movements to basically defang them. You know, like when Burger King stands with Black lives, or Nancy Pelosi goes full Wakanda. Now, when this happens, state or corporate interests are more or less buying off their critics. And the acceptance of some groups often comes at the continued exclusion of others. You know, we saw this during the movement for gay liberation when trans people were excluded, or when victories in the civil rights movement further alienated more radical groups like the Black Panthers. Concessions like these give movements a win without fundamentally challenging the sources of their oppression. And even worse, they make the state seem benevolent, lessening the likelihood of future agitation. Before we get into it, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Surfshark. Surfshark's a VPN, and if you don't know what that is, it's sort of like wearing pants, you know? All the important stuff stays private and secure inside when you step outside. Now, a virtual private network, it's going to help keep all of your online activities private and protected by encrypting your information. And it's really important to keep your data secure, especially if you're on a public Wi-Fi network, because your information is going to be vulnerable to bad actors who might be connected to that network snooping on your data. And VPNs are not just great for security, they also have a lot of other benefits. You know, for example, you know when you look up flights? Well, they're tracking your activity. They can raise prices according to how interested they think that you are in that ticket. But when you activate your VPN before you visit the airline's website, well, they're not going to be able to track you. And by making them think you're someone else, you're going to get a better deal on your flight. And Surfshark is such a great VPN to choose because you can use their service on an unlimited number of devices to keep your whole household secure. They also offer 24/7 customer support, so if you run into any issues, someone is going to be there to help you. When you get Surfshark, you're getting more than just their awesome VPN. One of my other favorite products they have is Surfshark Search, which allows you to browse ad-free without advertisers tracking your digital footprints. So I don't know about you, but I hate it if I click on a product online and I'm getting ads for it on every website and every app I use for weeks. Now, Surfshark Search keeps all of those targeted ads away from you, making for a much better browsing experience. So if you want to check it out for yourself, head to surfshark.com/wisecrack to get 4 extra months of Surfshark. And if you don't like it as much as I do, don't even worry, because Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in giving it a try. Now, let's get back to the show. Olufemi Otaiwo argues that this kind of co-opted diversity politics often benefits elite, privileged figures within such movements rather than the group as a whole. One example he uses is of the Congressional Black Caucus co-sponsoring Ronald Reagan's 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. As always, Ronald Reagan, we salute you, patron saint of all that we do here. If it wasn't for you, a lot of things would be better. Now, this support enabled the elites of the Congressional Black Caucus to seem involved with solutions to the crack cocaine epidemic, but at the cost of a rise in discriminatory law enforcement and legislation that devastated the very communities that the Congressional Black Caucus was meant to represent. Another risk is that any concessions made to marginalized groups by the state can be rescinded. You know, just recently, I was reading about how the actress Hunter Schafer renewed her passport, and when they sent it back, they changed her gender from female to male. You know, so the same state that once affirmed her existence as a trans woman has now just decided to take that recognition away.
On my new passport, male.
But to be clear, it's not the case that all DEI victories are just co-option and trickery. You know, there have been real material gains made with anti-discrimination and diversity politics. I mean, it's like a good thing that your boss can't fire you for being black or trans or pregnant or Muslim or bald. At least for now, you know, by the time this video comes out, that could have all changed, because that's the speed at which history is moving these days, friends. It's going fast, and it doesn't want to slow down. It's like our current political reality is the bus from the movie Speed, you know? And the bus on the movie Speed, there's a bad guy, and the bad guy's like, don't slow down or I'll kill everyone, and it kind of feels like that. Except there's no Keanu to save us. In this way, many of the policies lumped in with DEI are fundamentally policies about workers' rights. You know, but as we've already mentioned, the Trump administration started rolling these protections back on day one, which has turned the war on DEI into a war on the employment rights of marginalized groups.
What if after diversity, the question is, well, we don't want you to have unions, or we don't want you to have a College of Fine Arts because we don't think that that's appropriate.
As Gabby Del Valle writes, the war on DEI allows more pernicious ideologies that were once relegated to the conservative fringes like racism and eugenics to seep into the mainstream. You heard it here first, folks. Eugenics is mainstream again. Things are going well. So while critiques of shallow, co-opted diversity politics seem important, and they are, celebrating a full-throated dismissal of DEI seems a little misguided, you know, even potentially dangerous. As even if certain labor rights have been attained under the framework of DEI, well, I mean, at this point, they're still preferable to no labor rights at all. Some still might argue that focusing too much on rights for specific groups can distract us from building one unified working class. You know, according to this line of thinking, by dividing the working class into separate identity groups, we end up fighting against each other while the bad guys can just stand on the sideline counting their money. And the most extreme version of this critique is something like, who cares if the dock workers toss around the R slur as long as we're building working class consciousness? Shouts to dock workers, I think you're good people, except the dock workers in season 2 of The Wire, because they were bad guys. In this thinking, policing workers' language distracts from the actual work of organizing. In a less extreme form, this is what some refer to as class-first politics, where class identification is more important than racial identification. It's different than first-class politics, where only people that can afford first class run every aspect of society, not relating to your lived experience in any way, shape, or form, yet being wholly responsible for making decisions that affect your life or death. What if that existed? If you've seen this picture before, you might think that it's making a good point. You know, because all of us, no matter what race, need to come together and fight against an oppressive class structure. But these comparisons can obscure both the different privileges afforded to white workers under white supremacy and the specific need for black liberation. As W.E.B. Du Bois extensively documented in Black Reconstruction, white labor often worked to maintain its position of dominance over black labor. Rather than seeing black workers as fellow laborers, some post-war whites started groups like the KKK to solidify their superiority rather than build solidarity. Now, while certain folks on the internet would argue that, focusing on identity groups can run the risk of distracting us from large-scale labor organizing and workers' rights, Silvia Federici pointed out the problems with this back in 1975, writing, "In the name of class struggle and the unified interest of the working class, the left has always selected certain sectors of the working class as revolutionary subjects and condemned others to a merely supportive role." Now, Federici cites the consistent sidelining of women's issues from left-wing organizing in favor of an overriding, universalized figure of the male worker, from excluding female workers from unions entirely to not extending strike benefits to them. Now, it's not to mention the sidelining of women of color by the rare white women who were able to achieve some measure of inclusion or influence in social justice movements. Now, when Federici wrote about this, women were largely still considered housewives, kept out of the labor force so they could perform homemaking, childcare, all the other work that supported and maintained the male labor force. Now, while today women have largely become included within the wage labor force, this has not resulted in the end of the sexual division of labor that Federici was criticizing. And she called for wages for housework, writing, "We discovered that the overalls did not give us any more power than the apron, quite often even less, because now we had to wear both." And this is the same risk faced by the left-wing critics of DEI policy. As in their desire for one unified working class, they can end up universalizing one specific type of worker, usually the male worker, which is different from the male man. Yeah, I went there. It's really no holds barred with me. Elon made comedy legal, and I'm going to use it. As feminists like Federici point out, one of the consistent blocks to a unified working class is the way in which non-male workers remain invisible. Why would women or black workers or sexual minorities want to join a movement which views their primary concerns as less important than those of their white male counterparts? Instead of this, others argue that the real path to collective power for workers is expanding the scope of struggle so that everyone and everyone's, specific concerns gets included in that fight. By acknowledging that the working class is divided, and by forming a movement which attends to those differences, a new kind of universality can be achieved. And this is one based on fundamental solidarity. The logic that your struggle is my struggle, not because it's exactly the same, but because social justice is total, or else, it's unjust. It doesn't exist. And in the often very valid leftist attempts to critique liberal DEI initiatives, some of these critics have inadvertently aligned themselves with the same far-right positions that are basically using the attack on DEI as an excuse to undo the advances of the civil rights movement, which is bad because the civil rights movement was in general pretty good. It's a pretty good thing overall, but disagree with me in the comments. Let me know in the comments why you think the civil rights movement was bad. Now, while DEI policies have been a tool of co-opting subversive social movements into the state, the anti-woke critics of DEI seem to be unaware that they too are vulnerable to this sort of co-option, but their co-option isn't into the neoliberal state, but potentially into the far right. When progressive figures celebrate the end of DEI, they're not just aligning themselves against shallow liberal policies, they're also positioning themselves within this broad sea change. Celebrating the end of woke policies at the current moment is pretty hard to detach from endorsing Trumpian attacks on minorities and workers' rights more broadly.
You have diversity hires who are deeply religious and anti-trans versus transgender students who feel unsafe versus, honestly, the majority of the bullies are described as Black and Latino. So then you have the Black and Latino students who are being protected by the counselors and by the school because they really want to implement restorative justice. And guess what? No one's happy.
Whether it's attacks on their labor rights or their very visibility in the public realm. And in this sense, such people are extremely vulnerable to becoming part of the far-right project itself. And you see this with a lot of people online where people maybe used to start getting mad at woke or DEI stuff, and next thing you know, they're popping up on far-right podcasts and shows, and you're just thinking were they always a grifter? Did they become a grifter? Did I fall for the grift? Who knows? Shout out your favorite grifter in the comments. And this is especially true when woke gets positioned as an activist privilege, divorced from the universalist values of the ordinary worker. Now, if you're on the left and you're just cheering on the end of DEI, it's becoming increasingly hard to signal that you're just criticizing, shallow representation politics and not endorsing Trump's wholesale program of extreme social conservatism, which again risks wholesale co-option by the far-right agenda. It's sort of like if the enemy of my enemy is my friend, then the friend of my enemy is my enemy. Is that a thing? Did I make that up? Am I a genius? I don't know. But the potential of co-option has some serious implications for how the left can respond to the right raising the specter of woke or DEI policies. Rather than screaming at the immaterial, shifting specter of wokeness, those on the left need to be fully aware of the specific attacks being launched across society against minority groups. And these attacks cannot be repelled with a simple universal language, but instead with a strong sense of solidarity. Following from the perspectives of black radicals like Du Bois and feminists like Federici, we could argue that acquiescing to the types of frames, languages, and organizing strategies imposed by the state will only make resisting Trump and the far right even harder. So rather than rejecting the ephemeral floating signifier of woke or DEI, which increasingly can mean anything to anyone, the left should maybe be rallying around a coherent wokeness which recognizes the diversity of struggle rather than a blanket dismissive universalism. Only then is the building of something truly universal possible. Thank you so much to our friend John Duncan for helping us write this video. Please do go subscribe to his channel. Leave a comment and subscribe if you haven't already. A big shout out to all of our patrons, and we'll see you next time.